That was pretty overwhelming.
Did you enjoy that? I mean, if you didn't, then, you know, look on the bright side, you got to see a film for free, so that's good.
Exactly. They can have a go at you in the Q&A.
Bunch of cheapskates.
Anyway, it's my pleasure to introduce Rob Hardy BSC. It's no exaggeration to describe... It's no exaggeration to describe Rob as one of the preeminent DPs of our generation. He first started garnering attention with his photography of John Crowley's Boy A back in 2007. Rob went on to contribute to the hugely celebrated Red Riding series, as well as photographing a variety of projects including Shadow Dancer, The Invisible Woman, and Testament of Youth. In 2015, he collaborated for the first time with writer-director Alex Garland on the film Ex Machina, which won a slew of awards, including several BEFAs, a DGA First Time Director Award, and an Oscar for its VFX, with Rob receiving a BSc nomination for his work. In 2018, he teamed up with Chris McQuarrie on Mission Impossible Fallout, where he succeeded in bringing his characteristic style and taste to a blockbuster franchise. Continuing his work with Garland, the team completed Annihilation in 2018, the TV show Devs in 2020, and Men in 2022. Civil War, released last week?
Last week.
Has been widely touted as the most expensive ever made by its studio, the highly regarded A24, and opened at #1 in the US box office. So a few relieved execs at A24.
Very relieved.
I'll wager. And whatever you felt about the film, it's great to see a film dealing with such dark and challenging material being made at this scale. So, it's a pretty overwhelming piece of work.
Yeah.
And it looks like quite a large part of the big military scenes were achieved, at least in part, practically. So I'm guessing the people of Atlanta must have hated seeing your unit signs.
They did. We were very disliked. In fact, the film, when we were shooting it, was called Road Trip. We weren't allowed to call it Civil War for contentious reasons. And particularly, we just didn't know, you just never knew how people would receive that. But yeah, I mean, originally one of our, one of the big end sequences was supposed to be shot in downtown Atlanta, but we had to move it because the residents didn't want us flying helicopters down their streets.
I would have liked to see the mail drop for the location managers for that one. You know, it's going to be the middle of the night.
Yeah, we made quite a noise.
So it can be pretty hard working at that sort of scale to keep a kind of individual visual stamp on what you're doing. I mean, how did you try and go about that? Because, I mean, obviously you did succeed, I thought.
Well, thanks for saying so, Jake.
That's all right.
I think, you know, working with Alex, it's like I've said this on many occasions, but we sort of share the same visual sensibilities. And we both knew pretty much what we were after well before we started, which meant that it, you know, in terms of its sort of continuity, a visual continuity, it felt like we could kind of maintain that just simply because we didn't really know any other way to do it. So it was always going to have that kind of stamp on it, I guess. But that said, it is a very different beast to everything else we've done together before. I think each film or each production we've worked on has had its own distinct kind of aesthetic, and Civil War is no exception. I always describe this one as quite abrasive. That was sort of how I kind of went into it, or at least that's how I started thinking about it. Not least because we were sort of riffing off the idea of war photography.
Yes. Well, I mean, the film is a lot less about political division, and it's a lot more about the act of recording terrible events and what it does to people. And I mean, in fact, Alex has said he says the film is about the importance of journalism. Were you sort of channeling your inner Robert Capa in this in this project?
Yeah, I guess in a sense, you know, one of the first things when we first started talking about it, one of the first things I was thinking about was this idea of a photographer, and actually more specifically a still image, taken in under duress in really extreme circumstances. And I sort of and I looked at a lot of that kind of photography, and I imagined, I kept thinking about, it kept coming back to this one thing, which was like, what does it feel like to be there in that moment, and what's happening in the few seconds or moments that work up to that image being taken, and what happens in the few moments and seconds after the image is taken. In addition to that, what's happening outside of that frame. And that was sort of my starting point, really, is that idea that you sort of work back from that singular image. And one of those things, it was one of those things that Alex and I talked about very early on when we first discussed the film, during the grade of Men. I'd read the script prior to that, before Men, in fact, before we even shot Men. And we were sort of focusing, really sort of laser focusing on this idea that, you know, obviously Kirsten's character, Lee, is supposed to be this sort of veteran photographer, and her images are supposedly arresting. And so we really wanted to sort of focus in on that idea and use that as a starting point. How, you know, what are those images? How were they taken? What's the content? And then everything else sort of followed.
Who did take those images?
Kirsten took some images, but when we actually shot, we decided, because again, we were just talking about, like, how do we emote the idea of that image capture? And we went around the houses and discussed, like, various methods of capture, and we landed on high speed. So what we wanted to do was to sort of differentiate her imagery to, say, Kaylee's imagery. I mean, she was actually shooting film, black and white, using the old Nikons, the FE2s. So that already had its sort of distinct look. And what we needed to do was to really heighten the imagery that Lee, Kirsten's character, was taking. But I think a lot of that came out of this idea of this sort of, you imagine the chaos and then this just moment of silence. And I mean, it happens a lot in the film anyway, but we really wanted to sort of, I also think it kind of emphasizes the chaos that happens around it. I mean, as you watch through those sequences, you really, they're like sort of heartbeats, you know, or frozen moments that really take you out all of a sudden. Well, not take you out, but I suppose they sort of drive home the idea of it in some ways. So we sort of focused on that, really.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's full of very arresting images, and I mean, I thought actually one of the scenes I was really interested by was when they drive through the forest fire at night, which is absolutely stunning. I'm sort of wondering how you did that.
Well, again, it's like, you know, this film, like I said, you know, our approach was going to be quite immersive, and it was going to be very abrasive. It needed to be immediate. It needed to feel like anything could happen at any given moment. And, you know, a lot of our initial influences were looking at, beyond the photography of it all, was looking at newsreel footage. And the fascinating thing about newsreel footage for the viewer is that it carries this sort of unpredictability. And it's disturbing for those reasons, because immediately, or you assume that what you're watching is real, and at any given moment, anything can happen, and often it happens not within the frame that you're presented with.
Yeah, well, this is what we were discussing previously. It goes against all your instincts.
It goes
not to set up the thing to be right slap bang in the middle of the frame.
Exactly, but then it was we were really studying it and sort of looking at what is it like that makes that so strong. And it, you know, there's the knowledge of what the content is, so wherever it's from a specific war zone or a sort of catastrophic event, be it a terrorist event or otherwise, a tsunami. It's like, what is the thing that kind of, how do we sort of imitate that, you know? And I, like I said, I kept coming back to this idea of sort of unpredictability, and I will get to the forest fire in a minute. I am heading in that direction. We sort of looked at, I mean, everything we were doing, particularly in the battle sequences, was very much about choreography. So it really is sort of choreographed to the 9th degree, and we would hit it in stages, and everything was chronological anyway. But within all of that, Alex and I are just rather fond of surrealism. We just quite like sort of surreal stuff. And the forest fire was one of those moments where we could sort of sit back and purely enjoy sort of imagery at what is otherwise a very sad moment in the story, because Sammy's passing. But I guess it was a celebration. We wanted to celebrate his character rather than, dive into the
it was really effective.
Sadness of it. But we did it for real. So we just had like everything in the film, with the exception, obviously, of a lot of excellent work that David did with VFX, with the buildings and, well, a lot of things really. But we had this truck. It was like literally a truck with a big barrel of burning embers on the back of it. And it would just fly these beautiful embers into the sky. And the way they dropped, it was just perfect. We did a sort of precursor to that in Devs, where there's a sort of a fire inside a cave, where they're doing these cave paintings. And I remember Alex and I in the studio, this was in Manchester actually, and we spent about 3 hours just filming these embers until one of the producers came and told us to stop because we needed to get on with making the film. But we just sort of both felt there was some way to return to that, and of course Alex just brought it into the script. So, in fact, interestingly, originally that scene on the day we shot that, so the morning we were about to shoot that scene, Alex came to me. Hate me for saying this, but he came to me and he was like, "I've had this idea, and I'm going to tell you because you're the only person who probably think we can pull it off and won't think it's crazy." He said, I want it to be a moment where they all start singing. They need to just start singing. And I've got this track, and it's a Rod Stewart track, and I think that's what should happen. And I was like, that's a brilliant idea. We should shoot that. But of course, it never made it into the film because it was enough that we were doing what we did.
DVD extra.
DVD extra.
Yeah. If you don't mind me saying, there are times when I watched it where the film almost feels like a sort of very good video game. In its structure, it's characters travelling through discrete encounters where at any moment they might get killed. And in fact, when they arrive at that winter wonderland, the guy says, "Someone's trying to kill us. We're trying to kill them." It's like.
Well, yeah. I think I know Alex is quite a big gamer.
Is he?
So
because also I thought 28 Days Later is similar.
Has that vibe, yeah.
It wasn't something that was.
I suppose it's not really something I was thinking about. I guess it was more, that idea that as if you're on the corner of a building and somebody's shooting at you from over there somewhere, but you can't see them and they can't see you. It's like, how do you get around that corner? And, we, the audience, don't want to poke our head around the corner. And I was always like, I was always trying to push that idea that it's like, for us to not really come out of the point of view of the journalists, and never to leave that place. Of course, we needed to hit the beats of I guess the geography in a way of those sequences to understand the geography of it. So we did need to drop back and do a few things like that. But ultimately, it's like, I want to sneak around this corner, but fuck, I don't want to get shot. And it's gnarly. It's not in the way that video games. When the violence happens, it's sure it's bad, but it's also, it's comic book in a sense. But this. And somebody could tell me otherwise because I'm not a video gamer, so maybe it's not so comic book. But in this case, it's the horror of war. It really truly is the horror, and we have to just focus on that idea. Yeah.
So let's talk a bit about your relationship with Alex. It's kind of the cinematographer's dream to meet a talented writer who turns out to be a more than competent director as well.
Yeah.
Straight out of the traps, pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
Really, that Ex Machina was his first film. What were your first impressions when you first met?
We got on really well. My first impression was basically like, wow, this guy just doesn't. There's no bullshit. There's literally no bullshit. It's just straight talking. Look, we're going to do this. We want to do this. How should we do it? Let's talk about how we do it. And it's like the ideas are all there on the page. So the scripts themselves are incredibly economical, and they're not sort of overly visual or overly descriptive. Everything you need to know is on the page. But it also, from my point of view, it's wonderful because you fill in the blanks from a visual point of view, and there's so much room for that. But it's not. It's almost like the way I saw it was like, wow, there really is only one way, as far as I was concerned. Nobody was telling me this, but it was just like, there's just one way to do this, and it's this way. And Alex happened to be we happened to be both on the same page. So, I just really liked his kind of the sort of directness and the willingness also to actually not so much willingness, it's more the desire to just push it as far as you can and make the best thing possible. I know that sounds like an obvious thing to say because one would assume that everybody in this business wants to do that, and we're a room full of people who understand that, is that every project you do, you just want to do it in the best way possible. But obviously the thing with filmmaking is it involves so many other people, it's so collaborative, and it just takes one thing or one element to not quite align with all the others. And I think the thing, because Alex's no bullshit approach, in addition to the incredible his intelligence as well surrounding the ideas, and willingness to experiment, gave everybody, not just myself, but everybody involved, it becomes sort of inspiring, I suppose. But it's not without its moments, but.
Well, I mean, actually, over all these projects that you've done together, how's that sort of relationship evolved?
We just sort of give each other looks now, and it's just I look, he looks, and then we're like, yeah, okay, and then it's like, I'm going to do this, and he's like, yep, I saw it, and then I'm seeing, and it's just that, it's like, it looks, and then that's during shooting, and then I mean, with something like this, because there are so many elements, and it's such a big undertaking, a lot of logistics, a lot of hardware. It was always nice because we've had such a long working relationship, we could always come back to this quiet place where the pair of us would sort of huddle for a minute and just discuss. Like it was a grounding moment because everybody wants a piece of, that everybody wants to be part of what's happening, and it's just like it's good to then just for the pair of us to just kind of take a breath and kind of remind ourselves of like why we're standing in this place right now and what we want to achieve. I'm sure you probably think differently. You'll be like, well, what are you talking about? Bullshit.
The music in the film was very, very specific, very effective in places. I mean, De La Soul, Silver Apples, Suicide, were very conscious decisions, and also all of the sound design. I mean, Jeff and Ben have also worked on all of the films with you guys, right?
Yeah, Jeff and Ben, Jeff Barrow, Portishead. It's funny actually because when we were doing Ex Machina, we were scouting it, and we were in at Oslo Airport, and we bumped into the group Portishead. They were there in the airport, and they were in the middle of a tour. And Jeff, I don't know how, but they sort of vaguely knew the same people, and Alex just went right, because I was like, Andrew, and he just went right up to him, and they had a conversation, and then the next thing you know,
that was that.
That was that. And Jeff and Ben have been integral to the process, much in the same way that, people like Glenn Fremantle, who's the sound designer, has also been, along for the ride since the beginning, and I think he did an extraordinary job on this. And so, and also Marco and Mish, the designers, although they didn't do this one because we were in the US and it was a sort of
Union
who can
areas.
you take and who can't you? Yeah.
Cool. Now, I did promise we wouldn't go too much into the technical stuff, but I think we have to acknowledge the audience. So I know you were an early fan of Sony cameras well before everyone fell in love with the Venice, working with the f/35, but especially the f/65. But this film was shot on a very different camera. I was wondering if you wanted to talk about
Yeah, so, well, firstly, just to say that we did use a Venice. We used the Venice 2. I used a couple of those cameras because they I saw them as the sort of the bedrock of everything that we were doing. I used H-series spherical lenses that would work alongside those cameras. But then we also, again, this was one of the things we discussed during the post-production part of Men, was like, how do we create this idea of immediacy, but without it just being sort of handheld? Or how do we switch to the elegance of, say, Steadicam, or the kind of uneasiness of say, Stabilize, when we're not using cranes and dollies and helicopters and whatnot? It's what was that thing that's really going to drive home, that's going to basically be the spine of this movie, the visual spine of this movie, and it all comes back to the idea of the journalism and the immediacy and everything that we discussed before. Basically what we were looking for was something that could give us everything. It could also mean that we could work at speed, and we weren't compromising the sort of visual integrity of it, something that could work alongside the Venice. So we landed on these new. They were new at the time, not so new now. I'm sure everybody in the room knows the Ronin 4D, the DJI 4D cameras. I say this all the time. It's like a chicken. It looks like a chicken. You hold it like a chicken. If you've ever held a chicken, that's how you hold a chicken. And you hold it by the wings, and its head's here. And then when you walk with the chicken, you're doing this, but its head's staying still. Not all chickens, but this one I'm holding now. And that's the camera.
Designed by Farmer.
Designed by Farmer.
Yeah,
no disrespect, Ronin, but anyway, it's a brilliant camera, brilliant camera. And we did some experiments with it quite early on. One of the restrictions we found, there was like a list of lenses that would come with it because of the weight factors, and there wasn't really anything on the list that was sort of jumping out at me. And it has its own sort of LiDAR system as well, so it can focus, it can do face recognition, all that kind of stuff, which is absolutely brilliant. It can be operated from the body of the camera. It can also be operated remotely, so you can be on the wheels, which I loved, because it meant one of the things that Alex and I were talking about in terms of Steadicam, for example, was that he just comes back to this relationship thing. He's just like, I just want your eye on it. I want your frames on everything. And so something that had the ability to be remote, so I could, watch the action globally, as it were, frame things, and whilst an operator was sort of out there doing it, often I would be out there doing it as well. But it was nice to sort of switch and change. It also had what we called kamikaze mode or sport mode, where you would just literally press a button, one of the handles, and it locks the head, so you can whip to things and then go back into a sort of Steadicam kind of mode. So, it came down to the glass, it really did for me. And what we ended up doing was we just then went to Panavision and we just tried to find glass that could give us what we wanted, but at the same time the camera could hold the weight of it. And we landed on the set of Leica M08s, which actually, as luck would have it, obviously were also stills lenses. So it sort of, everything seemed to align. But then what I wanted, they were too clean, so I just had them detuned. I got Dan Sasaki, you know, as everyone does, who got into fiddle with the lenses and detune them so that they matched the look of the H series. And that's where, and then we sort of had the mounts machined for the camera, and that's where we landed, really. And then what it meant was we had 6 of these, and what it meant, well, we ended up with 5 because we trashed one. I think got blown up or squashed by a tank or something. But on each of these cameras, and again, this is something we discussed early on, Alex was like, how can we, like, when it's really going crazy and we want to change a lens, or how can we do it in a fashion that's quick because the thing needs to recalibrate? So I was just like, well, why don't we just have a lens on each camera?
All right, like Hugo style.
Yeah, so then we just had a couple of magliners and we have...
That's the 35 camera.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then it was just like, you know, bring me the 35, bring me the 50, and then we were just marched into the action.
The beauty of a $6,000 camera, you can just have loads of them.
Yeah, exactly. But the main thing is that what it gave me and the film, I think, was it just allowed us to have, like I said, the elegance, but also that sort of immediacy, and it got us into the action, and it made the cameras invisible. So in terms of sort of methodology, and this is something that we started with Ex Machina, really, and I was sort of touching on it before that, but this idea that you create a 360-degree environment and you put everything into that environment. So that means the design, you know, the sort of texture, the feeling in the air, the way the light falls, everything needs to feel like it's a real place. And so that when the actors walk into that space, and to a greater extent the crew as well, you feel like this is happening, this is really happening. And these cameras also allowed us to then get behind that, and we could just be very, like the photojournalists themselves, we could be very nimble and reactive, and so it's sort of everything kind of aligned. And also, I mean, bear in mind it's a road movie as much as it is as a war film. So we could really we could travel with these things, and we were on this journey. Alex shoots everything chronologically. So by the time we got to the end, we really were shooting the end. I mean, the last shot in the film is the last shot that we did. The first shot in the film is the first shot we did. So it was bookended by a day each of Nick Offerman. He was with us on day 1, and then he came back at the end, and he was just like, you guys look terrible. Really fucked. What have you been doing? And we were exhausted by that point.
Yeah, I bet. In terms of the lenses, I mean, all your other work with Alex has been anamorphic. Is that correct?
No. Men wasn't. Men was the same as this, actually. H series. Yeah, love those lenses. Charlie, I love those lenses.
I think we could open it up for some questions, if that's all right. We've got a travelling microphone, so I'm going to ask that you wait until the microphone gets to you. I don't know who's got it. But I think we've got a question at the front here.
Well, congratulations on the most powerful foray into the heart of darkness here since Storaro, and Apocalypse and Kubrick. I was thinking Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket here. Very, very powerful stuff.
You can stop there. Great, thank you.
No, the question is, it looks like it used to be the 35mm versus digital. I mean, you've got a fabulous machine with this Sony 2, and you've got those Panavision lenses up front, and you're getting in right there. And should we abandon this notion that it's 35 or 65 film versus digital? Should we give that up now and just see these things can be, used by a great cinematographer such as yourself, says he flatteringly,
Yeah, I guess that is the question. Well, if the question is should we give up, are we being told to? Is someone saying we should give up? If there's a gun to our heads, then maybe we need to make a choice. I think we should keep ourselves open to make that choice until we no longer can. So I would say probably the opposite, really. I would say any format should be, for any of us, should be fair game. I mean, obviously, economics come into play.
Yeah.
Appropriate usage would be one way of approaching it. I mean, we can shoot on our phones, or we can shoot on 65 millimeter. I think that's brilliant. I think it's like we've got probably the biggest amount of choice that we've ever had. So in that respect, I would say, wouldn't it be great just to keep that choice for as long as we can?
That's it.
Hi Rob, thank you so much for your work. I really, really enjoyed that. I just wanted to know a follow-up from using the 4D, just which things in particular are you using the 4D for versus the Venice?
One of the things, actually, I mean, a lot of it, the majority of it is, there's a whole mixture of stuff that we used in there. I forgot to mention we used a bunch of Sony A7S Mark IIIs. We basically for the car work, so we had 3 vehicles, one of which was like a pod car, one which we called the free drive car, which had nothing on it, and it was just literally the car with the interior and everything. In fact, all of them had the interiors. And then we had what we just simply called the coverage car. Now, Alex had this idea because it was based on just the nightmare of shooting in a car for many, many days, many weeks. And how that can really slow things down. And we decided early on we were not going to go near any sort of low loaders or anything like that. So we ended up with this car, and it had like somewhere between, at any given moment, somewhere between 12 and sometimes 20 cameras attached to this vehicle, and every conceivable angle. So if you imagine you've got 4 people in the car, you need to cover the look of the passenger, who might look back to the person on the driver's side in the rear seat, their eye line, and the reverse of that, and then consequently every other reverse shot that you could possibly imagine. Then we had the exterior, the sort of hood mounts. We had the side window mounts. It was all there. So in that respect, those cameras were perfect for that moment. I found that the Venice was really good for the more sort of epic, sit back and look at the epic nature of things as they unfold. A lot of the helicopter work, a lot of the aerial work, a lot of the stillness, and particularly the dialogue scenes. One of the things that we found with the Ronin was the DJI camera was that it was so sort of, if you imagine it's just like this kind of like really energetic little kid that really just wants to get going and can't sit still. It was a bit like that. We at times we just wanted the lens to be still, so we could shoot some dialogue, and it didn't want to do that because it reads off the bottom of the camera, and it's constantly trying to correct itself.
So even if you lock it, you can't just...
You can lock it, but in the end, you're sort of like you're locking it to a point that it becomes really restrictive, especially if you're inside a moving vehicle. Right. But one of the things I found was that it had a tendency, like any remote head, stabilized remote head. It's that technology. Ultimately, it wants to start wandering at some point or another, and you find yourself doing sort of minute corrections in order just to keep it in one place. And so the Venice was just like, I was just like, just bring me the Venice. But then, really, the Ronis was just, you saw it there. It's just the immediacy of it, and not just the action, but capturing any moment that we felt, required that sort of unpredictability, and that's probably about 80% of the film. I mean, there's a shot where, like in the scene with Jesse Plemons, which is what I think is the eye of the storm, really, in the film.
He's so good.
That we decided actually at that point in the story, what we would do was, rather than sort of be there, like we had been up until this point, right, with the proximity of it all, we just thought, we watched the blocking of the scene on the day after we decided about Jesse's red sunglasses, and then we were like, we're going to watch this from a distance. We want it to feel very observed, and we dropped back and we went onto the long lenses, the long H series, and we shot it in that way. So there was a sort of weird calmness to it, because everything else had been, and then suddenly obviously it all explodes. And there's one of my favourite shots actually is we follow Jessie as she climbs out of the body pit, and she gets in the car, and it happens so quickly you sort of barely notice it, but we go in the car with her, and the door slams, then it goes, and it was one of those moments where I was, at that moment I was remote, and the operator was sort of doing it for me. I'd been in the body pit at that point. I was just like, I need a break, but I'm going to, and it was just, I knew that with a movement like that, it needed pinpoint accuracy on that end frame, because you really needed to sort of be with her, even if it was only for a few seconds. So it needed to be a remote head that did that move. And
like
it was
a person would never hit that point.
Would never hit that
if
point.
They were holding it.
Yeah, so the operator just literally ran into the car. All he needed to think about was just going from this point and running into the car, not hitting anything. Didn't have to think about the frame. I was doing that. So it was one of those perfect moments of synergy where those cameras really allow that to happen.
I mean, the other thing I wanted to say about that scene, which I thought was really interesting, was the actual shot where Jesse drives the car and knocks them over. I mean, it's just that one shot. You know. In a lot of films, there would have been quite a lot of, and it's really shocking because it's just that shot. I mean, I've seen the film twice, and both times I was like, oh, that's quite bold.
Well, I mean, yeah. It was partly because, again, that's the beauty. I think a lot of the beauty of like the editing and the cutting in Alex's films is that he really understands imagery, right? He really understands it. He understands the power of it, and he understands that if you allow things to just breathe and you allow imagery to hold, you can get so much more out of it if the content has you gripped, has your attention, and not cutting away from something, especially something like that. It just makes it infinitely more shocking, But you're right. It's like there would be probably 4 or 5 other cuts in that.
The body going in.
But I think it was that. It was that, and it was also mainly because there was a tiny bit of VFX involved in because we had and so we were just like, well, we want to save the money for later, so let's just do one shot. It will be cheaper.
Good decision. Yeah. Okay, we've got time for a few more questions. So how about at the back there, the guy in the hat?
Hi, thank you for that. That was amazing. I just wanted to talk more about how you and Alex approached the idea of like death, more particularly within the death scenes. I know you were talking just before about like usually in films you would just have like 10 or 5 cuts or 5 to 10 cuts, but probably more specifically at the end where we see the kind of like what I would call a passing of the torch moment, where our main character dies and then we see the young girl kind of step into that. So it would just be good to know more about that.
That sequence. So so as I was saying to Jake earlier, it's like we were really, everything, it was almost like the cameras were secondary, right? And for the most part, and we just concentrated on choreography. And then the sort of, the kind of step-by-step execution of that choreography as we move towards our goal. But that sequence, really, we reversed engineered it. So it was really about how we get to that point that we knew that image, the photograph that Jesse takes is the thing that we want to happen. And everything else worked to augment that, to orchestrate that idea, even down to the way the set was designed. So, I mean, like it started with, you know, we had a White House set, which was at Tyler Perry Studios, which we used the exterior for and some of the interiors, but then we needed to basically, like, blow shit up, and they wouldn't let us do that, obviously, because he needed it. So then we were forced into building a corridor and the Oval Office, and out of that, is that me? Sorry. Out of that came this idea that, well, actually we can literally design this thing in order to get to that moment, and we can design the choreography in order to get to that moment, and up until this point, and this was no exception, the action has been incredibly realistic. I mean, they were real Navy SEAL guys doing it. They weren't actors, they were stunt guys. They were just like, it was Navy SEALs. So we had that sort of brilliant element, which would then sort of emphasize that moment, help us emphasize that moment where Jesse finds the image. And as you say, the torch is handed over. It's interesting because then we were like, okay, so they need to part. So basically, she needs to pass from one point to another. When I say she, I mean Kirsten. And then Jesse needs to see that, and she needs to understand, like, shit, I'm going to go for that too. I'm going to do that too, you know, because she's like fueled up at this point. She's really energized, and but of course she makes the mistake. We always knew that it was as scripted, but the image that we wanted and the position, literally the positioning of where would Jessie be when she takes the picture, and we decided it needed to be from the ground. So we had to get her onto the ground somehow, and that's where the idea of the push came, and so forth. The idea, I mean, I just watching that again there, I just caught the end of it. It's interesting, isn't it? Because she knows before it happens, the moment before it happens, and I guess it speaks to the idea of the sort of journalistic idea of what is that, how you create that barrier. I've done this before in the past where, like, not anymore, but or at least I didn't think I was, like, had a little bit of an issue with heights, and I've been on tall buildings, I've been everywhere, not a problem. And a few years ago, I went up on the London Eye. I'm going to make myself sound like anyway. So I go up on the London Eye, and I got this weird sensation of like motion sickness, claustrophobia, and vertigo, all at the same time. When the voice on the intercom came over and said, "We're halfway up," and I panicked. But I had a camera with me, and what I did to alleviate that sense of panic and terror was just bring it to my face. And suddenly, I'm looking through this frame, which is what I did as a kid with this Super 8 camera that my grandfather gave to me with no film in it. I used to stick it up to my eye and like make these pretend movies. And I always found that there was a piece in there, but not just a piece. There's a barrier immediately. You separate yourself from any given situation. And I think everybody in this room is probably familiar with that sensation to one degree or another. So in that scene, you really, and again, like I say, so I just noticed it. It's like, I really noticed it again. It's like, wow, that's a brutal thing to do that she does. But I completely understand why she's doing it on one level. And then on another level, it's like, well, it speaks to the horror of what they've been through, the horror of what's happening everywhere, at the moment, and how you separate yourself from that horror in order to show that horror to the rest of the world, I guess. I'm trying to answer a bigger philosophical way, but I'm just a cinematographer.
It was quite a big question to talk about death, I mean, to be fair. Okay, I think we've got time for about 2 more questions, maybe. So,
hello. Thank you very much. I was on the edge of my seat the whole time. It was really exciting. I just wanted to ask about what inspired your imagery, maybe, if anything. If you looked at maybe Lee Miller's photographs or any photographs that came out of the January 6th insurrection, particularly, as a more recent horror.
Yeah, we certainly did look at imagery. Lee Miller was certainly one of those cases. I looked at a lot of, Kappa and people like that. Just like a lot of war photography. But that sort of weirdly, it came at a slightly later stage in pre-production. Like I said before, the main sort of source of inspiration was newsreel footage and the sensation that it gives you watching it. In fact, it was more about the sensation it gives you watching it than it is the aesthetic of it, because we weren't trying to replicate a kind of, we wanted to be a bit more precise with it, and we wanted to be very visual as well.
But still kind of capture the energy of it.
Yeah, and the sort of, the energy, but also that, again, that unpredictability, that like, anything could happen at any given moment. So that was the first thing. I mean, I kind of went back to some old favourites, I have to say. Privately, I looked again at Eggleston, and the reason I was looking at Eggleston, 2 reasons really, was just I adore the treatment of colour. I adore the look of those photographs. I mean, I could just dive inside them. There's something about you. There's every single element of those pictures you feel like is tactile. And I love the framing. It's always like, more often than not, it's center punched, and there's just a sort of there's such a capture that it's like you capture the emotion of the person, or he captures the emotion of the person, the subject. You know exactly what kind of person it is, or at least it's interesting to guess. But you more importantly, you're seeing the world they live in, and that to me was like something to hold on to, something I've always loved doing anyway. So it just aligned. I was leaning into that a little bit because it was just nice to have a sense of familiarity in terms of like when I was prepping the film. But also the fact that Eggleston, again, you probably all know this, but you look at the contact sheets and it's one image. It's just like click, move on. It's not click, 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 click. It's one image, move on, next one, next one, next one. And the way in which he would walk around his neighborhood or a few blocks of his neighborhood and just without a camera and just watch and look and learn and understand the geography of the place. And again, it was sort of no different to my approach, really, was to really understand the geography of something and understand how to get that sense of geography across. So Eggleston, someone else who walks around, another photographer, I'm sure you all know who I'm going to say, who walks around his neighborhood for years and years and years and has captured some of the most remarkable pictures, as far as I'm concerned, ever, of street photography, is Saul Leiter. Again, it came down to not so much the sort of color element of it. It didn't really apply to this, but just, again, the sort of sense of capture. Yeah, that and usual footage. Oh, and maybe the first 45 minutes of Schindler's List.
But just the first 45?
Just the first 45.
Fair enough. Okay, do we have one final question, anybody? Just down the front here. Just wait for the mic.
I don't come from the cinematography world. I'm more of a director-theatre kind of idea. And I'm just wondering, these people, I was involved in a road accident, and I remember that precise moment where I was nowhere. I didn't know where I was and that kind of thing. But that image is always the strongest image I ever have when I remember the accident. I don't remember what happened after, what happened before, but that moment, which I didn't know where I was the moment I remember. I was just wondering about the well-being of everybody involved in this. How do they deal with that every day?
It must have been quite intense some days.
Quite
like
intense.
The pit.
Yeah, it was intense. There's no two ways about it. It was intense.
Yeah. And that's a great question,
Yeah.
because it's something we don't often talk about.
The intensity of it all.
Well, just, the effect on your mental health of going through this experience that you're photographing.
Yeah. It's funny, actually. I feel, as the years have passed, I feel it's slightly more battle-hardened. I mean, there was a time way back when, in the first few films I shot, in fact, I remember it was after Red Riding, 74. It's such an intense experience, in a good way. And it was like you put your heart and soul into something, and then it works out, actually. And the fact that it's worked out. I remember once being in the kitchen and just opening the dishwasher. I was loading plates, and I just sort of burst into tears. And I don't know, I was like, is this an appliance that's making me cry, or is it the experience I had? I left 2 weeks ago, and it was a kind of delayed reaction. It wasn't sad. It was just sort of, oh my God, And after this, I think because we choreographed everything so much, even though we knew what to expect, we're still riffing on the idea of the unpredictability of it all, and it's exhausting when you come out of those moments, like step by step. You go into it, and we had, like, as you could see, most of the stuff you saw there was real in terms of the military hardware, the people, the gunshots. It's all there. I mean, it's like, of course, Glenn's done an amazing job sort of rediscovering those sounds and getting inside them, but it's pretty hardcore when you're out there, and especially watching the actors, because I've come from the school of cinematographers that really reacts to what the actors are doing, and you learn so much from their reaction and how then it informs your reaction, and this was no exception. I think Wagner was quoted as saying, when he walked onto that set at the end with the barriers, and then we just started, he was genuinely, he was just energized as well, but he was just terrifying. It was just terrifying, and the way in which we'd orchestrated everything, it was designed to be that way, because it's fucking terrifying. In reality, it's terrifying. And I think about it, and there are moments there where it still gets me, actually, when I watched where the beast comes through, and it's the Humvee smashes it against the tank, and then they drive up to it, and they just, with these massive heavy guns, I wish I could knew the technical name of the guns, but anyway, this thing is just like, you can hear the sound of the cylinder, and you can feel the pressure of the bullets. I find it sickening, actually, and it makes me think about other things that are going on at the moment, and I have done in the past. And it's designed to make you feel like that. It certainly makes me feel like that even now watching it.
Well, ultimately, it's the point of the film with a young girl, because she's being hardened up to sort of go through this to be.
That's it.
To be able to take that picture.
To take that picture, indeed. And as it was pointed out earlier, the baton gets handed over, and she's building up to it. And but our actors, they did so amazingly well, along with the rest of us, in a sense, to get through it. But yeah, put it this way, it was quite a party at the end.
Okay, well, I think that's a good place to say thank you very much, Rob, for coming to tell us about the film.
Thank you for coming, guys. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Jake. No. Thank you, Jake.